Did you guys get a chance to listen to the Dharma talk? Okay. All right. So just to summarize, this chapter is nature as teacher and nature as refuge. And what I'd like to do today is kind of give a little bit of a unifying theme in this. Dharma reign, and the other is the one thought. One thought, countless teachings. As I mentioned before, Dharma has many meanings. It is a Sanskrit word that does not adequately translate in English, and that the first meaning has to do with essence, the true nature of things, the true nature of us. And so when we look at Dharma, our ultimate goal is to find our true nature. And so our goal in our contemplative practice is to recognize our true nature. The other meaning, of course, is the path. So it's like the Tao in Chinese philosophy. It is the path to awakening. And the theme here is that although there is only one teaching, there are many paths. And then, of course, there's some in the teaching that says there is only one path. And the reason for that is that we are all different people, and we have different predispositions, we have different ways of learning. So our ways of learning, the Buddhist teachers have over time learned to tailor the teaching to the seeker and the level of the seeker. In my own experience, I found that it was my level of understanding that when I first started out, I thought, gee, I'm not ever going to remember these things or understand these things. And as you keep plugging along, you realize that you are very gently changed. And that somehow there are some things that you know in your bones. You know, it seems that you have always known it. And I think that's kind of the part of the teaching. Depends on our degree of readiness. The other meaning of Dharma is duty. And we all have things that we have agreed we would do. And then duty is thought to be important in our awakening. There is a parable that goes like this. Once upon a yogi time, or once upon a Buddha time, this woman was ministering to her husband who was very sick. And so she was really busy, and suddenly the doorbell rings, and she's upset because, who would be interrupting me? And so he goes to the door and opens the door, and there standing on the stoop is God. And so she's really, really flustered and said, oh my God, you're here. And then out from inside the house, her husband calls out, I need you, I need to get this done. And so she didn't know what to do. And finally she goes and she decides, her husband needed her more than God did. And so she went back and took care of him, and it took a long time. And she had forgotten that God was at the door. And so after she was done, she says, "Oh my God, I forgot all about him." And then she was unhappy. She was sad because she had this opportunity to be with God. And so she kind of goes nostalgically to the door and opens it. And there was God still standing there. And she says, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I was sure that you had left." And God says, "Well, if you would have chosen to be with me, I would have been gone in an instant. But since you were performing your duty, I was nailed to the stoop. I couldn't leave." And I think it's an important lesson that, there really is no God. The God is in all of us. And so in the Catholic tradition, they say, "What did you do when you met Jesus Christ?" And so that's one of the meanings of Dharma that I really hold close. And then, of course, the meaning of Dharma that has to do with the teaching. It refers to the true teaching of the Buddha. And the teachings have been passed on over time, so that most writers would say there is only one teaching, but it is simply the interpretation that changes. And that interpretations need to change as they move with time. That what might have been true centuries ago may not be true today. And so the theme of the Dharma reign, of course, then has to do with Dharma reigns equally upon the earth or the universe or all of us, but that depending on where we are and what season or what year or what our level of understanding is, then it changes. That is one aspect, one unifying aspect of this chapter. The other unifying aspect that is carried on to the next is the idea of the universe as a hologram. And so when we go to Indra's net, or Indra's jewels, that Indra is the king of the gods, and he has this infinite web that sometimes they say it's filled with dewdrops, or sometimes it is described as having jewels. And that each jewel reflects the entirety of the infinity of the net. And the infinity of the net contains each individual. And so if you just think in contemporary times of it as a hologram, so that the entirety, the infinity is contained in the one, and the one is contained in the all. So on today's, on the One Truth, Countless Teachings. Okay. So the other theme is that these two sutras, they are Chinese. It reflects the Chinese teachings, and they were made popular by the Chinese sages. And they're very long sutras. So the Dharma Reign Sutra, the Lotus Sutra, has 28 chapters, and the Flower Ornament Sutra, from which this little reading, One Truth, Countless Teachings, comes from the Flower Ornament Sutra, and it's got something like 35 chapters. I think the second one is more comprehensive, or at least it's more understandable to me than the Lotus Sutra. And when you look at the reading, it talks about then Mandrushi asked the chief of the virtuous, since that which the Buddha realizes is but one truth, how is it that they expound countless teachings, etc., etc. So Lord Manjushri, of course, is the Bodhisattva of transcendent wisdom. And the virtues, the chief of virtues, is taken to mean they are in our center. They are taken to mean enlightenment facilitators. That throughout all time and all ages and all traditions, there are those who have been more awakened and that continue to guide, so that, you hear about you are never alone. So that teachings are available to us. We just need to awaken. And there are the virtuous, the chief of the virtues or the chief of the visions. And I'm thinking that the first one, Dharma Rain, talks about the teaching raining on everyone, and then this second one has to do with the effects of the teaching upon us. The chief of the virtuous answered in verse, the meaning of what you ask is deep and hard to fathom. The wise are able to know it, always delighting in Buddha's virtues. As the nature of the earth is one, while beings each live separately, and the earth has no thought of oneness or differences, so is the truth of all the Buddhas. And in this Flower Ornament Sutras, they talk repetitively. Buddhist teaching is redundant, so and that's kind of how I realized I learned, is, you read the same things over and over in different teachings, and then finally it kind of dawns on me that, oh yeah, I do understand it now. So there is always the discussion about impermanence, emptiness, shunyata, and impermanence and suffering. There is some distinction in the commentaries in that and I think this is important for us, that it's customary to think about conventional reality and ultimate reality. And that you can never step on the same river twice. Impermanence. Each moment passes. And so the us who came in here earlier are no longer the us that, the we that are here now, because time has passed. But in the Flower Sutra, they talk about, that conventional reality is real. Some Buddhist, some literature, especially when I was just trying to learn it, was confusing about emptiness and ultimate reality. If I am not this person that I am, then who am I, what am I? So that the way I interpreted it is that let's do a parable again. So the student goes to the sage and says, you know, I need to learn how to meditate, so teach me how to meditate. I've done this and this and this, and so the sage takes him to a room. The house is in a busy street, and by the market. And so he says, go to this room and meditate. And so he tries to meditate, but it's noisy. He cannot concentrate. And there's the market vendors and the honking and the music from places, cars and stuff. And so finally he got disgusted and said, I came all the way here to learn how to meditate. How could you put me in this situation where I cannot even focus on myself? And so the sage says, well, this is the world you live in. You have to learn how to meditate wherever you are. So the idea is not so much the contemplative nature of our meditation, but how we bring the meditation out of the contemplation into the world that we live in. Of course, they talk about the householders and the forest dwellers. It's different if you are a forest dweller, but if you are a householder, then we need to perform our duties. Sometimes find the meditation time wherever we can find it. But the idea being that, every action is meditation. That we contemplate our every action. Again, in terms of Dharma as duty. And so there's also the idea that enlightenment can be had in one lifetime. And the scriptures say, well, yes, there are people who can be enlightened at once in one. And in fact, the Chinese patriarch was enlightened in one moment. But there are those of us who have to take lifetime upon lifetime to awaken. And that's also okay. So, and when we think about, a lifetime, it's a blink of an eye in the face of eternity, it's actually okay not to be enlightened or awakened here and now. So, I think that is all I wanted to add to the Dharma readings. The opportunity to awaken is present at all times, everywhere, to everyone, without distinction. That's the emphasis that they make there. The reign of one flavor that bars nobody. So it is up to us to be open to receive now or in many nows, I guess. So I'll open it to comments. What time is it? Oh, you've got plenty of time. Do we want to move into small groups? We'll do it the way we did it last time.
So we'll just maybe 4 groups.
Yeah.
Or be one group that would be smaller.
Maybe, or 5 groups. There's 15 of us, so,
You want to do 5?
or 12.
5 groups of 3?
Or maybe 3 groups of 5.
three groups of 5.
Yeah, I think why don't we do 3 groups this
What
time?
about
since it's
15
smaller?
groups of 1.
All in favor?
So let's,
Meditate on that.
yeah. Let's maybe do, what are we doing here?
15 groups of what?
Yeah, that's right.
No.
So everybody count off 1.
I'll start.
3.
1, 2,
right?
3, yeah.
1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
I thought
So
1, 2,
3.
1,
2,
3.
1, 2,
3.
1, 2, 3.
1.
2.
3.
Oh,
Oh, geez, that worked.
we should do 3 groups of 5.
That's
Yeah.
what we
Yeah.
can do
That's-
with 3.
What?
Yeah.
I think we actually decided. We kind of decided.
3 groups of
Yeah.
5.
3 groups of 5.
Right. Yeah, so we have to 3 groups.
So 1's over here,
Right.
2's over there, 3's.
And what are we, what's our,
Yeah, so Nora, is there any topic you want us to cover?
did you find it?
I haven't really thought about it. I think, our understanding of Dharma ring
Sure.
and, any other of the teachings and how it applies to our own progress on the path, I guess.
That's
Perfect.
heavy.
So, does any group want to start?
I think group 1 had a pretty good lively discussion going.
Your group, yeah. Well, then let's start with group 2.
Yeah, finish on a high.
You can go. I have the paper for you. So where we began was that the Dharma reign is accessible to all, like in every moment, but that the individual hears and takes what nourishes them in that moment. Even though it might have access to everything in that moment, they kind of hear the teaching that they maybe need. And then Nicole kind of drew the analogy of a plant, insofar as like a succulent plant takes what it needs. I can't remember the second plant that they use an analogy, but compared to an oak tree, a banana, like they're looking for different nutrients, different qualities of soil, different amounts of water to nourish their growth and their own being. So kind of the underpinning of all that is just the timeliness of the lesson and the timing of each person's path and own learning along the path. From there, we also discussed the influence of the motivation of life and death as a catalyst for practice and like kind of fostering a willingness to turn towards practice that's along the path. And then this somewhat ties back to the first point, is the timeliness of the present moment. Kind of, a couple of the older people, I was the youngest person in the group, but everyone else was kind of like recognizing the timeliness of the moment that we're in right now because of technology and also the circumstances in the East, but also like in the 60s and 70s of all the teachers that came to America, and the stark contrast in which like the gratitude and willingness to engage in the practice now, rather than like if you were born in the 1800s and like the only people that were reading Buddhist texts were the transcendentalists in New England, and like a lot of people in the country wouldn't have, they literally wouldn't know that a Buddhist tradition was accessible. Then we talked about no matter the size or differences in the practice, nature and Dharma can still be accessed and nourishing. I don't have a lot in my mind as to what we discussed about that. We acknowledged kind of the multiplicity of the world religions. That was kind of your point a little bit here. And then the absorption of Dharma as a result of effect of a tendency towards being in the present moment. And again, kind of an analogy with plants of like recognizing the present moment, planting these seeds in the present moment with yourself, And then kind of where we ended was tangential and following along that same line of thought was just being responsible for the quality of our mind in every moment.
God, you're good. You pulled all that out.
Wow.
That was.
Very close to done.
The semester just began Tuesday, so I'm like back in note-taking mode.
That was awesome.
You forgot the millennial.
Oh
word.
yeah, and millennials are, there's a conversation apparently with millennials that planning their funerals already, and I confirmed that. I have thought, we don't, yeah.
Meditating on their own death. It's facing death.
Very, very stoic.
It was an article in the news.
Any other comments? Group 2?
Well, I could just, I don't know if I can remember everything, but so if other people could just jump in. Well, we started with duty and wondered what that was all about. Because some of us had the idea that it may have some idea, connotations to it as being a burden, a duty, very regimented, burdensome, not really a joy or pleasure. And maybe a better word might be commitment. Or does that capture it better? What's going on there? We don't know. We're just airing all these things out and wondering. We'd like to hear input from other people if they have any ideas about it.
Where was that at in the text?
That was
In
the top.
Nora's Dharmatology
Definition of
Cemetery.
Dharma.
Dharma's duty.
Oh, right.
And then the other topic that we seemed to talk about was essence. What does that mean? What is true nature? Is that the word we use? What is that all about? What does that mean? And got really philosophical. We talked a lot about, we threw in some physics in there, quantum physics.
Sure.
Once you observe something, you create it by observing it. It's not there until you observe it. And then we got into Taoism a little bit. Maybe that, the minute you start describing something, trying to describe reality, you no longer have it. It's gone. The very act of describing it makes it disappear. So we spent a little bit of time on that. One of the things we came up on duty was we tied it in with the story of, at least I did, Martha and Mary. In Christianity, they have a story where Martha and Mary, where Jesus visits this household, and one of the sisters is taking care of everybody in the house because there's a lot of guests there. And Martha is running around trying to fix everything and take care of everybody and fix the plates and tables and everything. And Mary is just sitting in front of Jesus at his feet, adoring him, doing nothing, not helping at all. And so she gets faced with a lot of criticism from the other guests. Why aren't you helping your sister? See how much work she's doing. And then Jesus says, well, don't criticize Mary. She's okay with what she's doing also. So we were thinking, that action and contemplation, maybe duty is maybe just being involved in the world. There's nothing wrong with that. And applying the contemplation to your activity in the world by effort. So something along those lines that's also we talked about as far as duty is concerned. So I think that's, did I forget anything?
Yeah.
Anyone else from the group?
We kind of careened out of control, so.
That's a good group. I think you mentioned this ethereal nature, and we kind of touched upon that too in regards to time and the teachings as well. How the second we try and solidify it, it dissipates. And I've had that experience sometimes with teachers where I'm like picking up what they're saying. I'm like with them, and then all of a sudden I think I've got it, and it just like it's gone. And we talked about that with time. That the minute you try and solidify something like that, you're out of the moment and it's gone.
I just thought that was old age now.
That's the path to enlightenment.
Yeah, we also came, so along those lines, like it's like being in a certain state, but once you realize you're in that state, you're no longer in that state. You're just like, darn, it's gone.
Yeah.
Oh, I think another part of what we talked about was, as far as duty, was that actually being in this Bodhisattva challenge of being aware of our environment and others and the world is actually part of our duty. It's a duty to be aware, and in that way you become more awakened, and then being a part of the world, you can serve as an example for others too. So that was another idea of what duty would be.
Doesn't duty also have a connotation of effort? Like you really, like when you just don't want to do something, so I have to meditate again. It's almost that duty of, okay, no, you have to do it. It kind of gets you that perseverance aspect, I think.
Well, the Bible of yoga, since I'm yogi by training, is the Bhagavad Gita, and the book opens with the prince, who is the leader of the army. There's a battle between good and bad. The Lion King had taken over, and was not taking care of there was just a revolution, and so the prince now rises up as the leader, and so and his charioteer is Lord Krishna, and he looks at the battlefield and says, I cannot do this. These people are my cousins, I'm related to them, I'm just gonna throw down my arms and let them kill me, because I cannot fight these people that I know and love, and because they were related at one time, and then the bad guys took over the good guys. But Lord Krishna says, you can't do that, you agreed to do this, and you have to go to the battlefield. You could get killed, but you did your duty, and if you no longer want to do it, then finish this job and then go and quit. But you cannot quit in the middle of these things. And so I guess that's kind of, he was the, Arjuna is considered the first conscientious objector.
That's a very interesting situation, because you fight your enemies, or you not do your duty. This has been talked about in many different contexts. I've been in so many contexts where this particular episode is talked about. And one of so what should I do? Right? Should I kill my relatives, or should I do my duty? See? And the answer actually was, do your duty, but don't be invested in the outcome. in other words, if you're not invested in the outcome, then you don't contribute to the samsara, right? So in other words, you're doing it. I'm sorry, well, nothing. But if you can translate that, if you say, well, that sounds great, right? You do your duty without being invested in the outcome. There's no passion there. But if you look at it that way, I told you in many contexts. See, then you just say, well, I'm sorry, there's nothing personal here. I'm just jumping in. Just an accident. You might be my cousin. We grew up together, but I don't want to be invested in all of this. Then the other side of the story is that kind of impersonalization. You see, actually avoids or denies the fact that this is a moral choice. See, and you're escaping the moral choice. So this is another context in which I've been in discussions of this very, they've used this in so many ways, but I'm saying and it's a conundrum. And what is a conundrum? A conundrum is a situation where there's really no answer. And we're faced with this conundrum. I'm saying it doesn't matter whether you do your duty or I'm saying you spend the rest of your life, whatever you decided, thinking of that or something.
Buddhist parables are actually full of those things like, the monk is meditating and the deer runs past him and the hunter comes by and says, well, have you seen where the deer went? And what is the monk's choice? Knowing that, here's the deer running for his life, but here's the hunter who needs to feed his family for the winter. And so the parable just ends there.
Well, my take on this conundrum that I just talked about is the conundrum is how do you frame that moral choice? See, if I'm going to kill my relative, this is somebody that I know I grew up with. See, if I'm going to do my duty, just a minute, what is duty anyway? This particular kind of duty is a duty that has been formulated by whatever, a military, it's just a rule in a book. See? I'm saying it doesn't feel anything. I'm saying here's your list of duties. I'm saying that's not a lie. It doesn't what? It doesn't bleed and feel anything. So I'm gonna go with I'm gonna go with my relative. See, so in other words, all I'm saying, you're making the moral choice. See, in other words, there's no real morality in that rule book, as opposed to when you're face to face and, kind of pull the trigger, you know what I mean? Well, no, the book told me to pull it.
Last week I talked about, my stage in life being really feeling the need to be involved in politics. The fact of the matter is I hate politics. I've always hated politics. I can't stand it. And here I am in my retirement, totally absorbed in politics, not because I want to do it, but it feels more like a duty. That's what it feels like. I should be doing this.
I didn't hear the last sentence you said.
What's that?
I didn't hear the last sentence you said.
I just feel like it's something I should do. I should. I want to do it. It's important. It's not that I just should do it. I want to do it. And I feel like somehow by doing it, I'm helping myself out too.
But the question,
because I'm having to deal with all my emotions, everything that's going on inside of me. I have to deal with all that stuff. I never had to deal with it.
yeah, but see, what you're saying, you have to. In other words, the other side of the question is, can we really escape it?
Yeah.
even if you did want to do it, can you really escape it?
Well,
I think that we
that
cannot
really
escape it.
helps me to deal with it, the idea of doing it, but not being really invested in the outcome, because the outcome may not turn out the way I want it to, but that's no reason not to do it, you just do it.
I think the conundrum really begins with the duality of the thinking, that there's right and there's wrong. Well, that's a very Western approach to everything. When within the choice, it's neither, and it's certainly not in the middle.
No,
So-
but it can be. What do you value more? Do you value?
It depends on what you value more.
Right, exactly.
Not on what someone else values or something else. I'm sorry, I really do have a thought.
I was just going to say that when I think about the idea of duty, I come from my background in my undergraduate degree, so I think of like a Kantian notion of duty. And in terms of the point you were making, not to digress entirely from where the conversation has gone to, but in terms of the Bodhisattva challenge and the environmentalism, in terms of like a categorical imperative approach to like an ethic of like what are we to do in relationship to the environment, I feel like the categorical imperative offers a lot, just in the sense that if you were to see some of the atrocities that are brought against the environment, and then you were to try to then universalize that and generalize it into all beings, which were nearing 8 billion people on this planet, would the system still work if everybody were to universalize that ethic against the environment? No, the environment would likely, we would accelerate towards the end that it's heading towards right now. So then it is conversely, or maybe not conversely, but inversely, what can we do and what positive action can we take and then apply it to that ethical imperative? If everyone were to do this and to universalize it, what would the end, how could the end potentially be shifted? And I think that it's applying that type of deontological logic or deontological ethic to something, it kind of starts to get it outside of the realm of the individual and the personal motivation as to why you're doing it, and it's not so much why I want to do it. It's just that in a larger view of the system being able to maintain itself and keep going really beyond just one life or 2 lives or 3 lives. Even my own children or grandchildren if I have children.
So we're
We
3
haven't-
minutes.
Yeah, we haven't heard from group 3, sorry.
You have a what?
Group 3,
Oh, we already. Oh, Matt, the group 3
No.
spoke. Not me. I didn't. I don't understand it. I didn't understand it.
Well, I mean, what else is there to say? That's all it is.
The 2 ladies here are very articulate about what we talked about, I'm sure.
Well, he talked about water, so if you want to tell us what you said.
I can't represent what you guys said.
Well, you talked about water though.
All I said about water is that, if you look at the analogy, and actually, quite frankly, you see, if you have these poetry sort of things, to me, I kind of read them over and over again. You see, but if I get, just like all analogies, if you start looking at the words and you take a merry journey, because words have different meaning, different context. You see, so you lose everything. See, so you have to go back to, to really capture the whole thing, you have to go back to actually what was said. And in fact, in the Quran, the people, when they quote Quran, they can never change a single word. If you ask them a question, they can never interpret it in any way. They have to say those exact words. So I say to some degree, since these things have to be understood symbolically and all that, you can't really be caught up in language, because that's my fault. I always am caught up in language, and I'm just always twisted in language, even in that Kantian version. You see what he said there, just brings back to me a whole 3-hour discussion of what Kant really means. See? Mm-hmm. So the thing is, in these kinds of things, especially when it's poetry, it's best to, not to stray too far away. See? Because then we'll wind up who knows where. See, which is my fault. I always stray too far away. Yeah, so I see Matt's the one that should speak for the group.
Yeah, exactly what he said. Ditto.
But you get yourself into all sorts of things, you know. It's just really, you stumble in all these words and meanings, etc., without a doubt. Even when Gabby talks about universal and, you know, there's something universal in all, but that's true. There's always something universal in all of us and everything. But there's also differences. You know, in other words, it's all of the above. You see, so we can start pitting, you know, well, which is more important, etc., etc. But you can get just caught in that idea for years, and that's the story of my life.
Well, the time is upon us.
And Glenn's life too.
So, Nora, I just wanted to mention, we're going to deviate just a bit outside of the book. I wanted to talk about this particular text next week. The reason why I bring this up is because in this particular writing by Longchenpa, he makes you understand that the environment has an impact on your practice and your meditation. So when you want to actually go out and go into retreats or do a meditation practice, it's kind of his advice for looking at nature and how that can benefit you according to the seasons, according to your location. So I thought it would be really nice to look at like how nature because last week we talked about how our minds can impact nature with the story of Milarepa, and then next week I kind of wanted to do the reverse, how nature can impact our own minds.
So just a comment here. I like what Nicole said here. You know, very poetic. If I may rephrase what you said.
Yeah.
The moment I understand something, or I think I understand it, or I think I have something, then I lose it. Right. Great line, right? Poetic line.
So we'll do our dedication of man.